Not often I get mail. Greetings to Her Ladyship Gertrude Bell. Ugh, my experience is that any letter that starts out with my titles is going to ask me to do something that I would rather not to do. The Royal Geographic Society would like to honor your accomplishments on the anniversary of having received their founder's medal. Thought they only did that for people who were done accomplishing things. Now, I'm far from that. But I've been preparing an archaeological exhibit that is going to show the art and the history and the culture of the Arab people, and the museum is almost completed. I don't know. I love this land, and I love the Arab people because they accepted me for who I was. Not a spinster, not an heiress, not a belle. What else do these people want? Oh, how annoying. The Royal Geographic Society would like me to write about my own accomplishments. Really. And they are also hoping that I would consider coming back to London to give remarks in person. Not bloody likely. Why don't they have a reporter write it up? Someone like Lowell Thomas, although he would make it all about Lawrence. He barely concedes that, Lawrence and the Raidun Aqaba and the Fasil on the throne of Iraq, that I had nothing to do with it, according to Lowell Thomas. How can I write about my own accomplishments? I mean, what I feel are my accomplishments, I am sure, is not what others remember. I would bet my diamond tiara that my translation of Hyacinth from Arabic to English, which was the equivalent of giving Shakespeare to the Chinese, won't even be mentioned in my obituary. Or the fact that I was the first woman to climb every peak in the Alps. That won't be in my obituary either. Oh, goodness gracious. What they're going to want me to talk about are my Mid-Eastern expeditions. I had seven of them. Over the years, I traveled over 20,000 miles in the Arabian Peninsula on camel and horseback. I was very good at cartography, and I would draw maps. I would note archaeological discoveries. Oh, and I wish you could have seen some of them. Pristine, lying in the sun and the sand. I always noted the watering holes, how many Turkish troops were in the area. I made it a point to get to know the chieftains in the area and what their political inclinations were. But they're going to want me to talk about just one of those expeditions, the one to Hayel. That was a major expedition. I will agree with that. I had to assemble 46 camels for that trip. I needed drivers and people for their camels. You have to go out into the desert laden. If you want to be accepted by the sheiks as an equal, you need to come like an equal. I always took couture dresses. I always took a fur coat, which was wonderful for sleeping on a cold desert nights. I always took a table, Wedgwood dinner service, crystal glasses. I took cots, a comfortable chair. I had leather and canvas boots, a lot of linen skirts, and many petticoats with pockets in them for placing the mats, for putting pistols or guns, some of which I would gift to the sheiks who were supportive of the British in the area. If you went and acted like you were their equal, they treated you like you were an equal. Thus, I needed 46 camels. And then, if you ever go there, make sure you go by camel. They are the most comfortable ride you will ever have. All you need is a halter, and you put it around the saddle. And with your switch, if you go on the right, camel will go to the right. Do it on the left, camel will go to the left. Now, when you want to get down, you want her to get down so you can climb off. You have to go, and eventually she will stop and get down so you can get off. And the saddle is called a shadad, and they are so comfortable. You get to eat lunch and loll around up there, taking in the scenery while the camel is walking along. They're just marvelous. But those old coots back there in the Royal Geographic Society, they're only interested in that Hillel trip. And they've never gotten over the fact that I was not only the first Westerner, but that I made the entire trip on camelback, and I had the nerve to be a woman. That slayed them. Now, I mapped that expedition, starting at Damascus and coming down through Saudi Arabia and crossing the Nafud Desert. Now, the Nafud was like crossing a labyrinth. It was huge areas of soft sand, and the wind would scope out these horseshoe-shaped things in the sand, and you'd be going along with your camel, and the next thing you know, there's a precipitous drop where the wind had carried away the sand. They call those the R's. And every once in a while, some of the higher ones would get a cap of like white sand. They almost look like snow, but nothing grew there. But what really touched me was the desert. The beauty of it, the quiet of it. It was so serene. I just fell in love with it. And crossing the Nafud, if you made a mile an hour, you were making wonderful time. We traveled through there for weeks in the soft sand. And we came to one incredibly high too, and I labored up it. And when I got to the top, I could see Irnan and the Najid Mountains, and all around me, a sea of soft sand dunes everywhere you looked. We headed for the Mizna Mountains, and when we came to the edge of the desert, it was startling. We went from soft sand to granite and basalt. That basalt had 10-story high black fingers reaching up to the sky. And in the middle of that plateau was a snow-white medieval city called Hillel. Well, while we were in the desert, things had changed. The political climate had gotten dangerous. When I arrived at Hillel with my camel train, I was received well. The sheikh's mother came for a visit. The head of the harem came for a visit. All the local dignitaries, but I was not allowed to leave Hillel, even though I had a letter from their chieftain giving me a credit so that I could get money to continue my trip. They would not honor that letter. He was away on a raid, and until they were sure that he had survived, they were not going to let me leave. Luckily, he survived, but in the meantime, I had to slaughter several of the camels to feed my camel drivers and guides, which meant that I had to gift more things than I had planned. I hated giving away those crystal goblets. But I suppose the most important thing from the historic point of view would be my meeting with Thomas Edward Lawrence. We met in Syria, northeastern Syria, before World War I, at an archaeological dig. And I knew immediately he was the sort of man who could light a fire in a cold room. We were both graduates. We had a lot in common of Oxford University. We had both had very high honors in history. We were both polyglots, although I knew more Mideastern languages than he did. And we both loved archaeology, and we both were fond of the Arab people. I spent a great amount of my time in intellectual arguments with that annoying man. He drove the military crazy. He liked to dress up in costumes. He was scruffy, but he was brilliant. He had some things going for him, don't get me wrong. He was 27 and I'm 47. But he didn't have the financial wherewithal to go out into the desert and be accepted as an equal by the sheiks. I taught him everything I knew. I drilled him with the maps and where the watering holes were, where the Turkish troops were. You would never know how instrumental these days I was in all of that. I abhor publicity. And he reviled it, but he courted the reporters. He was caught sneaking into the back of a cinema to see a film about himself. He became famous because Lowell Thomas wrote a biography about him and then spent the rest of his life traveling the world and giving speeches about his hero, to the point that you would not know that before that I was the one who was lionized in the East and mobbed by the locals. And it was Lawrence and Cox and myself at the Cairo Conference who convinced Churchill that Fasil would be the best king for Iraq. He was a warrior of great renown. He was respected. He had always supported the British. And although he would be a Sunni ruler in a Shiite country, he was a direct descendant of the Prophet, which would be his trump card. And so he got to the throne of Iraq, and the Arabs got self-rule. The Emir is here for lunch, so I will leave you now.